So this is a 90s track from the Stereo MCs. It's called Connected. And it's a good example of what I call the cloud chord. And the cloud chord is basically when you're flipping through channels or dialing in stations and you hear this overarching, let's say, ensemble of things hit you. The first thing that hits you is the cloud chord. Now the cloud chord might be the confusing of the frequency idea, that there's these secret frequencies you can put into music that would capture the attention of people or hypnotize them. I think that it's closer to something like the cloud chord, and maybe the cloud chord does produce a sort of hypnotic quality. And here's why I'm focusing on this particular piece. It's because for some odd reason they have a very high string occurring through the majority of the piece. It's singing like this, is D, and so the string is going the entire time, like, you know, pretty much. And so what that means is anytime you're gonna land on this piece, you'll hear that full ensemble with that high string. Now you might notice that there's this high string in a lot of pieces. So that high string is that cloud chord combiner, where the entire ensemble is one thing, but then when you add that high string, it's adding an overarching cloud chord, but also it's a note. So really, when you get down to the root of it, of course, it's a root note that exists within the entire piece. But because it's occurring through an entire ensemble, it's of course making a chord structure, and of course making your mind fingerprint that as the that particular song. So this is more pronounced in certain songs than others, and it has to do with high production value. So you're not going to hear it in a lot of like folk music or like solo music, but you'll hear an overarching idea of a chord in that style of music that also resonates. It's kind of like the purpose of reverb and things like this that add this additional resonance to the chord that make it more than it actually is. I mean, it's like when you play a chord on an acoustic instrument in real life, the experience is a little different than when you're hearing it played back in the stereo as well. So there's really something magical about this chord combination and something somewhat hypnotic about it. So I just wanted to mention that I noticed it again in this track, and so it's like obviously a popular technique to capture an essence of a piece and to kind of give that piece a particular signature for the mind. And I would imagine this has to do with psychoacoustics. I really need to check into that concept, because it's where the real magic of musical memory and the hypnotic quality of music comes into play, I think. Now there's another realm of the frequency of music where you actually are dialing into things that can alter the mood, but that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about a way to create a signature of a particular production, where a computer would recognize a particular piece based on certain elements, and maybe the human ear is also recognizing this piece because of these fantastic productions that these people have done, where you're hearing this note that takes this piece one level higher than if it didn't have that note. I don't know, it's just an idea, and it's pretty interesting that they put it in there. And I really think it's like this blurred area of this frequency hypnosis that occurs, where people talk about injecting these frequencies into the music. And here's another thought on the frequency thing. So theoretically, there's a couple issues with that make me not think that that's a real thing, but the cloud chord is a real thing, but the frequency injection is a little different. And that's because a lot of times music isn't made in a perfect pitch, where it's detuned to some degree in multiple stages of production. So that detuning is actually creating that signature again which is the actual thing that's making your ear memorize that in a unique way, and perhaps putting a little seed in your mind, to recall that later on in life, and maybe recall it in a way you don't even remember. That's how complicated this stuff gets. I mean, it's crazy. I really didn't expect to get involved with this sort of level of things, but I just happened to notice it. Like, as I've gotten more experienced and more wise in my years in terms of music. But another thing that would affect the frequency thing is that when you pitch things down, when you're doing all this bit modification and frequency modification, that's also going to affect that frequency. So what I'm getting at is that particular frequency would have to remain that frequency. So you could not toggle it in all different kinds of directions. So I guess another thing is maybe there's a particular level of resonance that could occur, and the resonance is what people are confusing with the magical frequency that makes people addicted and put them in a trance to magically love your music. But another thing that works to put people in a trance is the heavy promotion of material. So there's actually things that people do to make people more addicted to music in terms of promoting it, the repetition, the coverage on mainstream media, the hype game, all these things, versus the theoretical stuff that may or may not be having an impact. Even putting people in fancy dress could make people more addicted to a particular type of music. There was one more thing I was going to mention about the frequency stuff. Okay, so I actually did remember a few seconds later. The one thing I was going to say about frequency additionally is the human ear is only going to hear in certain levels. So there'd be really no way to audibly have that particular frequency in there without the person noticing it. And the real frequencies that would affect human emotion, besides the musical stuff, which obviously has a huge effect on human emotion, the frequencies would be beyond the range of human hearing. So they wouldn't be in the 20 to 20 range, and they probably wouldn't be captured by the system of capture, which only goes like 24-bit, 16-bit, these kinds of things. And so it would be beyond that range of capture that you're hearing on the playback device, unless the playback device itself had a way of adding the range in later on, which would create the trans-hypnotic quality of music. So what I'm saying is, to distill that, is if the human ear is only hearing from 20 to 20, basically, and then you're not going to hear that frequency in the audible spectrum, because the devices don't really capture that and they don't really play that back. Now we're dealing in a time of 32-bit, but again, it's not a consumer level listening system yet. So again, the frequencies would not necessarily theoretically actually exist to be able to hypnotize people into loving the music so much. Anyways, those are some thoughts on this root chord. Still doing always R&D on musical production, and this is just the thing I stumbled upon.